Hi, everyone. This is Rose Horowitz. I'm happy to I hope you will honored to introduce my guest, Laura Gassner Outing, who will be on my guest for my 10th episode of Woman to Follow. I'm a Pulitzer-nominated journalist and the founder of Woman to Follow. And I started this hashtag started in 2009. In 2018, I'd read a story about how we're always retweeting and following men. And I said, let's get this party started. And I used a hashtag and I tagged a few people and it went bonkers and became a trend and had 12 million impressions in the first 2 weeks. And there's also a list on Twitter, a Woman to Follow Twitter list that has been kept by my friend Stacy Kratz, known as Hey Kiddo on Twitter. And there are over 1,800 women on that list. And the whole idea is to amplify women's voices on social media. My guest today is Laura Gassner Otting, who is an entrepreneur, activist, and author. And we'll show a few pictures of her. This is her giving a TEDx talk. This is her talking about her book, which came out in 2019 on Good Morning America. So welcome.
Hi, Rose.
Hi, Laura.
How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so excited to be here. I actually remember when that tweet came out with the hashtag Women to Follow, and I was like, yes, finally.
Well, I'll just tell a little story of how we found each other, which is that your friend, I guess, and somebody you've quoted in your book, Scott Monty, who was a Ford executive and then found a new path, was on a Twitter space, and I guess it was with a historian, and somebody said, well, where are the women? And so I mentioned what I do. And then like a week later, or a few days later, I saw you say, well, what are some good women to follow, good woman historians? So I didn't know you knew who I was, but that is cool that, and that's how we met. Again, amplifying. So I was very happy that Scott Monty did that. And then I saw you. And here we are.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I love good women to follow. And I love men who are allies to women who say our names in rooms where we are not and make sure that we're known for others. So I much appreciation to Scott for connecting us.
That's awesome. I asked him what he was doing tonight. He said he's announcing at his son's hockey.
Yeah, he's watching hockey.
So thank you again. I'm really honored that you could join me. And I'll just tell everybody a little about you. Laura started she started at law school and hated it. So she left and she joined Bill Clinton's campaign to run as a president when he was a governor. And then was an appointee a presidential appointee in his administration. And she was one of the people who helped create AmericaCorps, which is a national service organization. And she then went on to have a profession in executive search profession, and rose to become senior vice president at execsearches.com. And then she decided to leave the firm and begin her own firm, and which is called the Nonprofit Professional Advisory Group. And then she sold the firm in 2015. And I think maybe that's when you wrote Mission Driven, which was her first book. And then her book Limitless came out in 2019 and debuted at number 2 on the Washington Post bestseller list. She's delivered a TEDx talk and appeared on Good Morning America, has an article I found in Harvard Business Review. So, and you can find her on her Twitter account, which is HeyLGO. And she has a website, and she's the founder of a group called Limitless Possibility. So thank you.
That's me.
Well, how has this been now with, what's happening are you, well, one of the things, let's start. Tell us why did you write Limitless?
Well, the truth is, I wrote Limitless because I sold my company to the women who helped me found it and grow it. And I had a bit of a crisis of identity. I had this moment where suddenly I was no longer LGO CEO, here's my card. And I was like, who am I now? Right? Like, who am I? What am I when I'm no longer the boss? And so I was actually. I was the chair of a charity auction, and a friend of mine got up to introduce me to, like, give the talk. And she said, "This is my dear friend Laura. She dedicates her life to philanthropy." And in that moment, I didn't know if I wanted to stick my cocktail fork through her eyes or my eyes, but I knew one of us was going down, right? There's nothing wrong with dedicating your life to philanthropy. In fact, I'd spent the previous 25 years working in, for political organizations, for nonprofits, for universities, for foundations, either through search, through politics. But all of a sudden, it was all I was. And I was like, I think she just lady who lunched me. Like, all of a sudden, this is it. And so I had this crisis of identity. I went home that night, and maybe I'd had one too many cocktails at the charity auction, but I bought the URL lauragassnerotting.com, and I just started writing about stuff that was pissing me off, to be honest. And a friend of mine, Tamsin Webster, who's the executive producer of TEDx Cambridge, called me up a couple of weeks later and said, I read this blog post that you wrote, and I like it. I think it's good. It would make a good TEDx talk. Do you want to do one? And I said, no effing way. There's no effing way. That is terrifying. I do not want to speak in public. I've never spoken in public. I do not want to do it. No, thank you. And I hang up the phone, and
all your work with executive search firms, you were in the background and never.
I mean, I would like give presentations for the, to the search committees, but I was never like speaking on stage, right? I mean, like, I had notes with me, I had candidate, I had files, I had resumes. So I said, no way. And I hung up the phone, and I'd taken the call on speakerphone in my car. My son was in the back seat. He was about 13 years old at the time. And he was like, Mom, don't you tell me I have to do things that scare me? Don't you tell me I have to do things that, that challenge me? And don't you tell me that life starts on the other side of fear? And I was like, oh God, no. So he was like, so what gives, Mom? So I called Tamsin back. I said, yes. 6 weeks later, I'm on the stage, 2,600 people, Boston Opera House, gold gilded walls, crystal chandeliers. And I was on stage, and I crushed it for like 11 and a half minutes. And then I forgot one of my really important lines. And if you know me, you see me look off stage left, and you're like, what's happening? But then I pulled it back together and I finished it. And that talk got some attention, and that gave me offers to speak. And I remember the very first offer I got to speak was for $1,500. It was in Boise, Idaho. They flew me out there. They gave me a check. They handed me a hat with a potato on it. And they were like, thank you very much. And I was like, wait, this is it? Like, I just come out here, I speak, you give me a check, and I leave? I've spent the last 20 years in the deliverables business of consulting. And I was like, tell me more about this job. This sounds really fascinating. So I decided I would see what I could do with it. So I made a little speaker reel, and I started talking to people, and I found my way to bigger and bigger stages. And then I got on stage where people were making what I consider to be real money. And I noticed that every one of those people making real money had a book. So I was like, I got to get me one of them. Okay. So I wrote Limitless. Now, I had written Mission Driven actually in 2007 when I was still doing executive search, because Kaplan Publishing had called me up and said, do you want to write this book? And I was like, okay, sure. Merry Christmas. Here's your book deal. And so for those who knew I had a book, I was the nonprofit girl. How do you go from corporate to nonprofit work? But I wasn't talking about that stuff anymore. So for those who knew I had a book, it was brand confusion. And for those who didn't know I had a book, I didn't have a book. So I needed to write this book. And so I called a publisher. And the reason I tell you this long, shaggy dog of a story is because I think a lot of people have this idea that success is like for other people and it's perfection and they can do it, but I could never do it. So I like to tell the story and be real, because anybody can do these things. You can write the story backwards, really neat and clean. But I like to tell the story how it actually happened, because I think it's really important, especially as women, to just be real about it. So I called the publisher and I'm like, I want to write this book. And he's like, great, no, thank you. But if you want to write a book, we're actually doing this guidebook series about doing work that matters. Do you want to do one for us? And I'm like, no, I already wrote that book about, transitioning from corporate to nonprofit work. I don't want to do it again. And he said, what if you took that book, which is like 90,000 words, and you condensed it to like 20,000 words, coffee with an expert kind of feel, and you wrote that for us. And then after that, we'll do your next book. No problem. So I was like, sure. Okay. So I start writing the book, and about 6 weeks into it, I'm just fighting with the editor. It's just not working. They want me to write a certain book. It's not really what I want to write. And I call the publisher and I'm like, listen, I think you should fire me. I'm not the author for you. This isn't the book for me. And he's like, you know what? I've been thinking the same thing. You're right. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, but actually what you're writing is interesting. And there's a bigger book in here and a big idea here. And I think we should put that out in hardback in April when big idea books come out. And again, I was like, wait, what? So I panic and I call my friend and I'm like, I don't know what to do. And he was like, Laura, what do you want people to feel like when they've read your book? And I said, honestly, I'm just so sick of everybody being limited by everyone else's idea of what they should be and who they can be and what their life has to look like. And I just want them to stop listening to all those people and just live their own life already and just be happy. And he said, so you want them to be limitless, ignore everyone, carve your own path and live their best life? And there you go. That became the title and the subtitle of the book. So that's why I wrote the book.
I see we had some people, I'll just say, I think Neil Parrick, who I've worked with, and Ann Arriaga saying hello from Long Island. So if everybody could please share this on Twitter or tell some friends about it, let's get the word out there and amplify Laura for everybody. So once the book came out, and tell us what this idea, because I mean, I think that it's the whole idea of Limitless is interesting. And I'm not one to read self-help books, kind of, if that's what this is,
Yeah.
But this was very concise and well written and had a real point that I thought that many other authors don't get to. So tell us about this idea of Limitless.
Yeah, and I'm proud to say one of the blurbs I got for the paperback was from Jordan Harbinger, from the Jordan Harbinger Show, who said something along the lines of, in a sea of soul-sucking self-help garbage, finally a book that doesn't make you feel worse after you finish it than before you started. Because it's true, like the self-help world is created for you to need more help, because if somebody writes a self-help book, if you get better, they can't sell you another book, right? So the whole self-help universe is not necessarily there to help you.
And that's one of the points you make in your book, and I'm sure in your previous book, but that, when we think we want to do good for people, we say, well, how can I help? And you cite the example that there were 67,000 teddy bears sent to Newtown, Connecticut. The school shooting. And why? I always see things like that. I say, why? Well, they really need help to get services for these kids and the families. They're really devastated. That's the long term. But it's sort of what you said about these self-help books, which are why, what should I the question is, what should I do? Not how should I do it? What should I do? Right?
Yeah. So there's two questions that are lingering at her. So let me answer them both. The first is that the idea behind the book Limitless is that we all have this idea of success, and it's been given to us by somebody at some point along the way, a teacher, a parent, a boss, social media, whatever it is, that says success should look like X. And it's usually like driving the right car, living in the right house, wearing the right clothes in exactly the right size, the fastest, most expedient path to the corner office, leaning in, right? We can talk about all those things. But what I learned over 20 years of doing executive search is that success doesn't always equal happiness. My job in recruiting was that I had to call the most successful people in the world and recruit them away on behalf of my clients, which sounds really hard, except despite all this success, which is why I was calling them, they weren't all that happy, which is why they were taking my calls. So I was so interested in the handful of people that didn't take my calls. And I also then started looking at my own life and the decisions that I made along the way. And then I started interviewing people in the book that made very specific decisions to change their life so that they could have both success and happiness. And we can get into that. The second question is this question of asking, how can I help? And that was what the TEDx talk was that I gave. I was so frustrated over and over and over again, seeing things like 67,000 teddy bears descending on Newtown, Connecticut, or gallons of milk being sent to low dairy consuming Japan in the wake of Typhoon Haiyan, or the winter coat drives after a Haitian earthquake. Like, it's insane. And coming out of the nonprofit sector, I was so frustrated that we would have people trying to raise money for, school uniforms, or for databases, or like a part-time of an IT person to actually make the organization run. And meanwhile, you have people that are like, oh, well, we'll just do a muffin drive. And it's like, that doesn't help, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with sending a teddy bear. I'm really not. Like, it comes from the best part of us. It is the surest sign of humanity that I know exists on the planet. And yet, what do you think happens to those 67,000 teddy bears? They get incinerated, right? The money that it costs, like, some of them end up in the hands of children, these like tiny rays of hope that they're meant to be. And that's wonderful. But most of them end up in bins. And the money that it costs to buy and ship and store and distribute and eventually incinerate these teddy bears, I'm with you, could be used for things like grief counseling, or mental health care access, or common sense gun control, or wherever you stand on the political spectrum. I think we can agree that when we ask, how can I help? And we're like, oh, I can send this teddy bear. All we're doing is helping our own egos need to feel like we've done something. We are fulfilling this short-term cathedral of our own ego, right? We're not doing the hard yards, the long-term work to actually make a difference. And so in my talk, I say, like, we have to stop asking, how can I help? And ask a better question, which is, what needs to happen? Because when we ask, how can I help? We put ourselves in the center of the problem, and we define the solution by what we have to offer, as opposed to looking at it from the outside and saying, what needs to happen for this never to happen again? And that changes completely how we go about finding the solution.
It's a great point. I think it's seems like a timeless point, right?
Yes. And as you can imagine, anytime anybody does a teddy bear drive now, people tweet me about it. So I get a lot of teddy bear drive tweets. And I feel terrible being this person that's like, don't send teddy bears, but don't send teddy bears. Like, write a check to the organization for the amount that you would spend on the teddy bear. They know what to do with the money. Trust me. They know what to do with the money.
Right. And tell us a little more about Limitless and the idea of people and their, we used to call something called work-life balance, but you're talking about something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think work-life balance is, I think it's nonsense. I think it set us all up for failure, right? It says, like, work's here and life's here and never the twain shall meet, right? I mean, how many of us have social media accounts? All of us. And how many of us are friends with somebody from our professional world on social media? All of us. So there's already, no divide. And I think that I think millennials get a really bad rap in the workplace today. And I'm not here to complain about millennials. I'm actually here to tell you that I love millennials, because they are the first generation who is in the office, or, working from home, as it were, right now. But they're the first generation in a professional setting who has been a digital native. They have been in social media. They've been sort of out their entire lives. So they are the ones who are not hiding. They're not a different person at work than they are at home. And they're pushing a conversation in our workplace about values, about manifesting their values through their work, like that we've never had before.
And how does that all fit into this idea of, I thought it was very interesting that you spoke about that, because the book, of course, was written before the pandemic. And now we're seeing, what people are calling the great resignation. And how does that, it seems to be like you were very, Cassandra-like in your book, in what you said about millennials, and I guess at the same time what you're saying about boomers, looking for more meaning in their life.
Yeah. So what I talk about in the book is that I was fascinated by this idea that success didn't equal happiness. And I was trying to figure out what actually did, right? So, like, we're all working so hard to fulfill this checklist. Now, when I was recruiting, we used to say that there are like 8 factors that would motivate anybody at any time to look for a new job. And they're things like, will I be inspired by the leadership? What's the mission of the organization? How prestigious will the brand look on my resume? When I look for the next job, how many skills will I learn? What's the scope of impact? What's the scale of change I can make? There are things like, where's the position located? How much money will I earn? And we were given that list usually by like a high school counselor or a college counselor saying, pick a path, pick a major, pick a trade. But here's the problem. Nobody ever said, hey, Rose, take that list and prioritize it for what actually matters to you. And that's the difference between what makes a good job good and what makes a good job good for you. So I think that there have been generations before us that have said, like, you just need a good job. But the truth is, like, life is not given. It's not a given. Like, life is short, and you never know what's coming down the pike. And each one of us is having this moment right now, I think, where we're saying, when life goes back to normal, is the normal I'm going back to really the life I want? And I think for a lot of people, that answer is this sort of giant, resounding no. People aren't just, the great resignation is an interesting term because people aren't just resigning and like sitting on their couch, right? Like the government is giving people money, but it's not giving people that much money. Like people aren't just sitting on their couch, they're getting other jobs. It's more of like a great reshuffle than a great resignation. And they're looking for jobs that actually reflect who they are. In my book, in Limitless, I talk about this as the idea of consonance, right? It's this alignment, it's flow, it's harmony. Those moments, Rose, where the very best of what you do is being called upon to solve a problem at hand, a problem you actually care about, and you're being rewarded for solving that problem in some way that is financially, karmically, emotionally meaningful to you. Yeah. Those are the moments where you are absolutely in consonance. It's where you do your very best work. And I think a lot of people are realizing that they haven't had that up until this point.
I think for me, it just sort of surprisingly came in a way after the pandemic because I'm a news reporter, but I had a family, I have a family. I took some time out and I didn't sort of, I didn't work. I never saw somebody like you, so I've made my own way. And when the pandemic happened, Sri Srinivasan, who used to teach at Columbia, now teaches at Stony Brook, said, hey, let's create a community here. Yeah. Let's do a live stream show and talk about all aspects of the pandemic. And I said, I'm there, Mm-hmm. And even though it was every day, for 250 shows, which is 8 months, it was great. I was learning, new skills and, and booking fantastic guests and, generating great discussion. And there was a community that was listening. And, so that is an example. I didn't know where that would go, but it went in a place that aligned with, what I love.
Yeah, there's a story that I tell in the book about Jack Lew, who is the former Secretary of the Treasury under Obama. And Jack, I got to know him because he actually came to the Office of National Service and wrote the legislation that would become AmericaCorps. And he had worked for Tip O'Neill on the Hill, and then he went to go back to Boston and work in a legal job, a pretty good legal job, partner track, the whole thing. And he got an offer to come write this legislation. And all of his friends were like, what are you, crazy? You're going to go work in this little office for this campaign promise that might not even ever happen? Like, what are you thinking? And he said, I talked to the guy who runs the office and he's pretty interesting. And I think he's got my back. And because he wrote the legislation that became AmeriCorps, in the process, he met Bill and Hillary Clinton. And when Hillary became the Secretary of State, he became her chief of staff. And then he became the head of the Office of Management and Budget. And then he became Obama's chief of staff. And then Obama appointed him to be Secretary of the Treasury. And when I interviewed him, he said, look, my only career strategy is do interesting things with interesting people and interesting opportunities arise. Which is exactly what you've done, right? You did this, the live stream. You did interesting things with interesting things with interesting people, and look where you are now, right? Like you if somebody said to you in February or January of 2020 that this is what you'd be doing now, you'd be like, I don't know, I don't think so. No. That doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't even know how to get from here to there.
Exactly. As I started, I did that show, and then I did a weekly doctor show that I was producing and helped conceive. People turned around and said, well, you have a woman to follow, you should do your own show,
Right.
And I said, oh, okay, because it had been written, I mean, the profiles, the woman to follow, and the hashtag began, as written on Twitter. And I said, yeah, we can do this. So yes, I think passion is really important. I'll ask you something else, though. There was an example in your book of a woman, I think you know who I'm talking, Gina, maybe.
Gina Sinoni, yes.
Yeah, so talk about her, because in her case, she wanted to do something, and then she found, well, that didn't really, she couldn't afford to do the passion, and she went, so tell us that story.
Yeah, so Gina was, I actually knew Gina also from my political days, although all the stories in the book are not political stories. Those are the only two that are people that I know from politics. But Gina had always wanted to work in the airline sector. She left politics and went to business school so that she could work in the airline sector. And she was the person who was in charge of creating the routes for Delta Airlines, like the ones, like she loved doing puzzles, and her job was to figure out what the most profitable routes were that Delta could fly. And she loved the job. It was incredible. But she found herself getting increasingly aggravated at this idea that women should run for office, period, right? She thought it was a boil the ocean strategy. Get more women to run, more women will be in office. And she was like, that doesn't work. We're just telling women to run. We're wasting their time. We're wasting their money. Then other women see them lose and they choose not to run. Instead, we should look at data. We should look at all the electoral districts. We should figure out which ones are more likely to elect women. And then we should recruit and train and run women from those districts. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And so she was like, I'm going to go out and start that. So she goes out and she starts the nonprofit. And what she realizes is that it takes a ton of time. So she's not able to do that along with her big deal job at Delta. So she goes to Delta and she looks at her numbers. She's like, you know what? I could probably actually retire soon. Let me use the money. Let me save money from here, take the job where I'm making a lot of money, and sort of Robin Hood into the nonprofit that I want to run. And what's really interesting about this story is that I talk about how she leaves to go run this organization. And I actually don't remember because it's been a while since I wrote the story. But what she realized when she got to running it's called her term, when she got to running her term, she realized that she actually hated raising money. She actually didn't like doing it.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. So she was like, this is wrong. I don't actually want to be here. I actually want to be on the board. So she goes back to Delta. And because she loves her job, she loves what she's doing. She goes back to Delta in a little bit of a smaller role, but still making enough money so that she could donate generously to her term, and then find an executive director and a director of development to do the stuff that she doesn't really love. And then she remained just doing sort of the strategy work that she loves so much.
Yeah, I thought that was really brilliant and captured a lot of sort of the turmoil that we go through.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things. I think we have this idea that the only jobs of service, or the only jobs of purpose are jobs that have service, and service can only be services with sacrifice. So, like, if you aren't literally giving the shirt off your back to a poor kid in need, you're sort of selling out, right? You're just working for the man. But the truth is, all of us have a different reason why we do the work that we do. So I say to people all the time, like, if you're doing the work you do because you want to cure cancer, that's amazing. If you're doing the work that you do because you want to get out of debt so that your kids can make different decisions than you had to make, that's amazing too. If you're doing this work because you want to buy a fancy car or in a beach house, that's also awesome. Like, we have this idea that purpose can only be purpose if it's like higher or lofty. And because I spent 20 years doing executive search for nonprofits, I feel like an unimpeachable source on this statement. Your purpose only has to be your purpose. Period. End of sentence. End of paragraph, end of story, end of book. So if your purpose is just whatever it is that you want to do. So if your purpose is helping you build a business or grow a bottom line, or be able to be there so that you can nurture your kids and raise a family, that's totally cool. I think we have to give ourselves a break. And sometimes your purpose could be having a job where you make a lot of money so that you can write a check to the organization that you care about, the cause you care about, because you don't want to go work for the nonprofit.
Yeah.
That's cool too. The nonprofit needs that money. They don't need the teddy bears.
It's great. I love this. That it reminds me of that passage. I think I used in a quote today on Twitter. But you say, ambition has gotten a bad rap of late. It's a dirty word, even more so if you are a woman. Oh, she's so ambitious.
Oh, she's so ambitious.
That's right. And then you say, the guilt of ambition holds us back and keeps us from becoming limitless. Somewhere along the way, we assign sainthood to the word we assign sainthood to the word purpose, as if there were a picture of Mother Teresa next to its definition in the dictionary. And I think, that is, your purpose is your purpose, and that whole idea of, you can, or that, that we think we have to be somebody else really to do, we have to live up to this ideal of, who Mother Teresa was to have a purposeful life.
Yeah, and think about it. Like, if you're making, and let's just like use a ridiculous number, so you're making $1 million a year, and you can live on $100,000 a year, and you give $900,000 of that money away, what do people call you? They call you a philanthropist, right? If you work in a nonprofit organization and you're making $50,000 a year and you're going into debt to do it, what do they call you? A nonprofit employee, right? Like, it's just this, it's like completely messed up, and it's messed up. I will tell you actually why it's messed up. It's messed up because John Winthrop, who was, I think, like the 4th, the 6th, the 9th, and the 12th governor or something of Massachusetts, he actually gave a lecture on the boat coming over from England to Plymouth Rock, where he taught in 1630, where he talked about this idea that that charity is salvation, not for the poor, but salvation for the rich. The Puritans cared about two things. They cared about making a lot of money and religious freedom. And here's the problem with being a Puritan, is that pesky puritanical guilt. They wanted to make a lot of money, but then they felt bad about it. So John Winthrop's like, I've got a solution: charity. And so like I said, guilt is good for business. He was elected governor 4 times in Massachusetts and enshrined into law this idea that it's actually about how much money is being given versus the impact that they're making. And so it's just created this very upside down thing where we look at a definition of success that might not have anything to do with what actually matters, right? 67,000 teddy bears is not success when you have, 200 school shootings a year. That's just crazy pants. So, what I tell people all the time is that we have to stop giving votes in our lives to people who shouldn't even have voices. But what happens is that we have all these people who are constantly nattering away at who we should be and what we should be and how we should be, whether it's like a teacher early on, a parent, a boss, like I said, the internet, anybody. We have all these inputs about what we should be and what we can be, and God forbid what we can't be.
Fascinating. And I just want to read, I just want to go back to somebody, DJ Rodriguez, who I've met through the live streaming world. And she says, this is a wonderful message. And then she says, I love that word. I think that may be referring to limitless. And she says, I am very ambitious.
It's funny because when I speak in front of audiences, and I'll be in a room speaking to 5,000 people, and I'll ask, like, how many of you are comfortable saying, like, shouting from the rooftops boldly, I am ambitious? And it's like 4 people in the back, and they're usually cisgendered straight white guys. Women don't do that. They're not comfortable. We're not comfortable. We like responsibility. We like taking care of people. We like, nurturing. We don't like ambition. And studies have shown, like, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she was one of the most respected women on the planet. When she decided to run for president, suddenly she was vilified, right? We like women who have power. We don't like women who want power. And so I ask women all the time, I'm like, well, let me ask you this. Would having more money, more leverage, more freedom, more flexibility, more power allow you to show up more for the people you love and the causes you hold dear? And every woman in the audience is like, yeah. Right? So it's not our ambition, it's our responsibility. That's how we do more for the things that we care about.
And do you see that changing? Are women stepping up and saying, I am ambitious now more?
Maybe it's just the pandemic, but I think a lot of women are just like, screw this, right? Like, we're done. We're at our breaking point. We are being asked, we've been asked for decades in the office to do more office housework. And now we're here, right, at home, and we're picking up all the slack also. And, a lot of our partners have stepped up and they've done a lot of good stuff. But the truth is, there's still gender roles. And I think a lot of women are still, frustrated about that. And I do not think that being home, working from home, is going to be great for women because there are just assumptions about, what we're doing with our time. When I ran my executive search firm, we were virtual. We were virtual for 15 years. And this was, I sold that firm 6 years ago. So like we were remote before it was COVID cool, right? Like,
And why did you do that?
Why remote? Because I realized when I was at the big firm, what I realized was there was so much money going to overhead that it skewed the way that we were incentivized. And the way an executive search firm works is that you get paid 1/3 of the first year's cash compensation for anybody you place in a position. And if you're doing a search for a position that's going to pay $500,000, or say, for easy math, $600,000, your fee is $200,000. If you're doing a search for an organization where the salary is going to be $60,000, your fee is $20,000. So if you've got a handful of searches in your portfolio, who do you think you're more incentivized to do the work for? The $200,000 fee or the $20,000 fee? And I was very uncomfortable with the fact that I was being incentivized to do work for, frankly, organizations and positions where it was easier. It's easier to find the chief strategy officer of an international foundation that's going to pay $600,000 than a director of fundraising for a local domestic violence shelter, right? Those are hard searches. And I felt like I wasn't part of the solution, which left me in only one place, which is I was part of the problem. So I walked into my boss's office one day and I was like, there's a better way. And he was like, there's the door. So I started my own firm. And honestly, I was like 11 months pregnant at the time. And so I went home, I gave birth. I got a phone call from an old friend who was like, yeah, I heard you had a kid. Ooh. Cool, I guess. But our president just resigned. Will you do the search for us? And I was like, okay. And she says, what are you going to charge me? And I was like, $100 an hour. And she was like, okay, send me a contract. So I literally, like, baby in one hand pecking with the other. I'm like Googling how to write how to write a professional services contract. And I sent her a contract, and then that work beget more work. And suddenly I was busy, and I was busy from my living room, and we just never had office space. And then I realized, the reason that I am able to do this work for less money is that I don't have overhead. I don't have office space. So we just grew the firm without overhead. And we would get called all the time by these old men in search committee meetings who were interviewing us. And they were like, so you're virtual. Does that mean you're not real? And my business partner, who was this delightful, very well-mannered, very opposite from me, like little blonde ball. She did like horse jumping or dressage for a hobby. She had a lilting Georgia accent. She had a PhD in psychology, and she played the cello. And she would lean forward and she would say, well, you know that beautiful office space of that big firm that did the work before that it didn't work so well? Didn't they have gorgeous office space? And the guy would be like, oh, well, we never go to their office space. Of course they come to us. She goes, exactly. So why are you paying for it? And they would go, oh, and we would get the work. So, but people would ask us all the time, well, how do you judge the quality of your staff's work? I mean, you can't see them. How do you judge the quality of their work? And we were like, by the quality of their work.
Right.
But I think that's what's going to happen. I think that's what's happening to a lot of people who are not right in front of their bosses who don't know how to manage them. They're not being judged by the quality of their work because they're used to being judged by how much face time they put in the office. And so I think that's really going to affect both men and women. But I think that men are historically judged on confidence, whereas women are judged by competence. So men can talk a big game about the work they're going to do, and they don't actually have to necessarily do any of it, whereas women have to show up 4 times as well. And don't even get me started on women of color, right? I mean, that's 6 times as well. So I really, I don't have the data to bear this out because it's all happening in real time in front of us. But I think that I would stake my house. I bet my house on the fact that women are going to not rise as quickly through the ranks during this time and for a short time after.
Troubling, but
yeah, not good news. Yeah.
I thought it could go the other way, but so DJ is saying, wow, this is deep, but damn real. Thank you, Laura, for being the change. And Paula Kiger, who's a great writer who I've worked with in Digimentor, saying also interesting. Unfortunately, I have to go. Thank you, Laura, for your expertise. And DJ is giving us another 100. So thank you, DJ. DJ has a great show about issues relating to mental health and helping people. Let's do something new, which is you talked before when you came on, you were eating a bar and saying that you just came from rowing. And we have a little video that shows you rowing. So I think it's apropos. Okay.
I think we're missing the sound.
We're missing the sound. Yes.
That's
see what you're doing.
Living a limitless life.
Oh, there it is.
You're so busy, okay. Everybody else happy that you forget to make yourself happy. And when we get in that place, when we don't use that energy, that thing that we do better than anyone else, we're feeling limited. I want you to live a limitless life. And in my new book, I'll teach you how.
Thank you. Sorry, but we saw you rowing. We didn't hear you, but we saw you. So thank you. And what is your next project? Do you have one that you know of?
So I do actually. So I've got a couple things that I'm working on. The first is that when Limitless came out, I put out an assessment online at limitlessassessment.com. So I talk about consonance, and consonance it's made up of four things: calling, connection, contribution, and control. And so the assessment is a series of questions that has people asking themselves how much of each of these four things they have and how much they want, to help you figure out if you're in consonance. And then it gives very specific tips on what to do so that you can get yourself into consonance if you're not. What I found is that over the course of the last 3 years, I've had almost 6,000 people take this assessment. And
wow.
So I have like 500,000 bits of data on this, because I have information on each of these four areas of consonance. And then also I have a bunch of demographic data. So I can tell you, about men, about women, about each generation, about veterans, about people of color. I mean, you name it, I can slice and dice this information in all sorts of ways. And so I have like a 28-page report that I'm about to put out. I'm working with Harvard Business Review to put together another article on this. So that's one piece that I'm working on to sort of help leaders figure out how to manage their people in this sort of new uncharted territory. And then the other piece, of course, will be my next book, which is going to be called Wonder Hell.
Wonder Health?
Wonder Hell.
Oh, Wonder Hell. Okay.
Wonder Hell.
The other sounded too tame for you.
So Wonder Hell is about this moment in time where, when you've done something and it's actually working, people are watching, they're listening, they're retweeting, they're into the thing you're doing. It's amazing. It's humbling. It's exciting. It's wonderful. And also you're like, I don't know what to do now. I wasn't expecting this. I'm so full of stress and anxiety. It's kind of hell. It's wonderful. And it's hell. It's wonder hell. And wonder hell is the space in your psyche where your burden of potential walks in and goes, hey, Rose, what you got for me? Are you going to live into this newfound you that you didn't even realize existed last week, last month, last year? Or are you going to let it pass you by? And everything that I've read says you just need to like hustle harder and rise and grind and lean in and all of this stuff to tell you to like survive wonder hell. But what I've realized that on the other side of this wonder hell is the next wonder hell and the next wonder hell and the next wonder hell, because success is not a destination. It's actually a portal to what else we're capable of doing. So I want to write a book where I've interviewed people about how they not only survived these moments, but how they thrived in them and figured out what they were made of.
That's great. So the idea would be that we can all learn from these moments, from reading these stories of the people in Wonder Hell.
Absolutely. I mean, I think all too often we hear these stories about unicorns, like how they started their business in the garage and how they sold it for $1 bajillion. But nobody ever talks about the messy middle, right? Like what it looks like when they're trying to figure it out. Like, you know, if you go hiking and you're at the bottom of the mountain range and you look at the top and you're like, I want to go there. You look at the top of the mountain, you go, I want to go there. And then you get halfway up the mountain, there's that little sign that says scenic overpass. So you walk over and you look over the scenic overpass, but what do you see? You don't see the top of your mountain. You see the whole mountain range, right? And there's other mountains and you're like, actually, I kind of want to go there. Right. And so you start thinking like, how many snacks do I have? Did I bring enough water? How much daylight do I have left? Where can I really go? And that's a moment of wonder hell where you're like, I actually wanted more than I thought I wanted. And so I wanted to talk to people and talk about sort of how they recalibrated, how they decided what they wanted to do. Jordan Harbinger, who I mentioned earlier, is one of the people that I interviewed. And he said, you know, look, I've been getting deals for years, people wanting me to syndicate my podcast and have millions of people, you know, downloading it. And he said, and you know, I sat down one day with my wife and I said, you know, why did we start this in the first place? It's because we have a baby. We're going to have another baby. There's only so many years where my kids are going to be like, Dad, you're cool. Let's go to Disneyland. I want to take advantage of those years. I'll syndicate it after they're grown, right? And then I've had other people that are like, you know what? I started this thing. I thought it was going to sell in one store. Now we're all around the world. I wanted more. I wanted to grow. So, you know, it's everyone from Kara Golden, who founded Hint Water, to people like Jordan Harbinger, to people like Carrie Lorenz, the first F-14 fighter pilot in the U.S. Navy, you know, groundbreakers, glass ceiling shatterers, world record holders, and just everyday people who have been able to figure out what they're made of and do more.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to writing it. People are like, I can't wait to read it. I'm like, I can't wait to write it.
Here's one of your bombs. To clear the way to becoming limitless, you need to ignore everybody and carve your own path. It's very inspiring. I think that's very sound. The only one who gets a vote about your purpose is you. So let's let me ask you, since I do this on every interview, you know, and I keep wanting to amplify the names of women. Who are your 3 women to follow?
Sure. So I mentioned Carrie Lorenz. She is the first female F-14 fighter pilot in the U.S. Navy. She is absolutely brilliant. She stands 6 feet tall. She walks out on stage in leather from head to toe and with like the sound of fighter jets behind her. And it says, "Welcome to my office." And she's just one of those people who never lets you settle for mediocrity. She's absolutely incredible. I actually sent her my book before it came out, just when it was in final draft form. And I was like, I only met her once and I had this mad girl crush on her. And I'm like, would you maybe consider thinking about possibly even maybe one day blurbing my book? And she was like, sure, you're a badass woman. I love to support badass women. Why not? So I sent her my book and she calls me back. And basically she was like, you're too smart for this book just to be good. You got to make it great. So make it great. And she then spent 45 minutes on the phone with me in between, I believe, sound check and when she goes on stage, which is kind of like the time when speakers, you know, get their act together, right? Yeah. And like are really focused. Yeah. She's just so much of a professional. She didn't even need that. And she spent 45 minutes on the phone with me, helping me figure out exactly what was wrong with it. And we've now become very good friends and we text all day about, you know, about all sorts of things. But she's just, everybody needs somebody in their corner who doesn't let them settle for mediocrity. So Carrie Lorenz is the first person.
That's a great story.
Yeah. The second is Rahaf Harfouche. And Rahaf is a brilliant thinker. She's somebody who I call up and I give like all of my complete, like messy, you know, nonsense of an idea. And she's like, oh, well, here's your outline. 1, 2, 3, right? She is a clear thinker. And she wrote a book called Hustle and Float. And in that book, she talks about how, like, when it's all about basically how to deal with stress and burnout if you're, you know, a writer or a thinker or living in some sort of creative life. And the title Hustle and Float comes from whitewater rafting, where you, if you're hustling the whole time, it's exhausting and you don't enjoy it. And if you're floating the whole time, it's boring and you don't enjoy it. And everything should have a little bit of hustle and a little bit of float. So she's somebody who thinks a lot about not just productivity, but humane productivity. So she's kind of like my work wife. She's like the person I talk to her every Tuesday morning. We have our our little mastermind session and just kind of like get our heads screwed on together the right way. What I love about her is that she's one of those people who's like, you know what? If you're not a morning person, forget about the miracle morning, forget about the 5 a.m. club, forget about all those things. Have a miracle evening, have a 5 p.m. club. Like, it only has to work for you. And she has this brand new LinkedIn course called Humane Productivity that is absolutely terrific. So I would encourage people to go look up Rahaf Harfouche and take Humane Productivity.
Thank you.
And then the last woman is a woman by the name of Dr. Tina Opie. And Tina is somebody who I've recently gotten to know by being on Clubhouse together. She runs something called the Shared Sisterhood. And she's basically dedicated her life to working in DEI spaces. So she is absolutely incredible. She's a professor. She does consulting in DEI, but it's really grounded in sort of culture and building cultures where everyone can work together. So it's not like, let me find the Black person and put them in charge of DEI, but let's create a sisterhood. Let's create an allyship so that we can all actually be in this together and working towards it together. So she has a book that's coming out in October, and she's just one of those people who she looks for opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, right? You're looking for opportunities to speak your name in rooms where you're not. And she is always the first in line to amplify other women and other women who she thinks are doing great work, because she is a shared sister. So her work, Dr. Tina Opie and Shared Sisterhood, is something that I think absolutely deserves a follow.
Well, that's great. I mean, one of the fun things about this is, when it's not a Twitter, craziness, when I just talked to one guest and I see, your 3 women to follow, and those are 3 that I don't know. So I will check them out.
I know it was really hard to narrow 3. I mean, I could have told you about Alex Carter, who's the head of the negotiation center at Columbia Law School. I could have told you about Denise Hamilton and watch her work. I mean, there are just, I could have told you about Leanne Davey, who does great work in conflict. I mean, there's so many great women. I was like, 3. How do I choose?
Great. And how do you manage, your family or work life? How is that? How does that go for you? Do you feel much more free having written this book and talked about how we all make our own consonants?
Yeah, there's a story that I tell on stage where I talk about the first day of school. Everybody, the first day of school rolls around, and all we see on our social media feeds are everybody's perfect, pretty little children, right? And their perfect, pretty little matching outfits and their perfect, pretty little hair, and everything's great. And I tell a story about how I spend my day, well, pre-COVID and now, starting up again, traveling around to conferences and companies and doing consulting and speaking and coaching. And so for me, it takes a lot of really fancy footwork to like be around for the first day of school. I have to move a lot of mountains, and my children, who, this is a few years ago, but despite the fact that every year for 15 years, I was like, you need to stand for the first day of school photo because I have to show the world that I'm the world's best mother, right? Like, this is really important. My children had other ideas. They were just such unmitigated disasters. They were such jerks that they didn't stop bickering long enough for me to get that photo. And so I do this bit when I'm on stage where I like walk across stage and I pretend to put the windows down so that the neighbors won't hear. And I talk about how I yelled at them like with all my might because I was so frustrated. I was overscheduled, overcaffeinated, oversensitive. And then we drove to school in stony silence with them, fuming in the backseat silently, and me in the front seat, really like second guessing every decision I ever made as a parent and every sacrifice I ever chose not to make as a working parent. But it was because I was in this cage, right, of my own creation, this idea that success can only be that perfect first day of school photo. And that afternoon when I got them home and I was going to like lay into them to my 17-point plan about all the things that were wrong, my kids were like, my older son was like, Mom, it was a new school, new classes, new teachers. We were nervous. And my younger son, who's so helpful, was like, yeah, and you had a chapter due to your publisher and I don't think it was going that well. So maybe you were nervous too. Such a helpful little pisher he is. And so rather than yell at them, we decided to have a do-over. And I'm like, the next day we got up, I made breakfast, they showered, everybody wins. And I got a photo and I posted it. And I got a photo and I'm like, what do you think I did with it? And it's like, of course I posted to social media. but I posted to social media with the caption, "Happy second day of school." And I talked about how what I realized in that moment was that my definition of success wasn't having the perfect family, wasn't cramming our ungodly, this unsightly mess into everyone else's definition of perfection, but having the kind of family who knows how to talk to each other when we're at our very best, but more importantly, knows how to call each other out when we're at our very worst. And that's really how I found my definition of success. So I don't really try to like, how do you have balance as a mom? How do you, how do you make sure that you're all things to all people all the time? I just try to be me. I talked to Sally Krawcheck, the founder of Elevate and Elevest for Wonderhell, and she said to me something which I thought was remarkable. She said, when I was a mom, and I was working on Wall Street, she goes, I just tried to be average. She's like, I was working so hard to crush it on the street. She's like, I just tried to be average at home. I just wanted to be there. I didn't need to knock it out of the park every single day. I just needed to be present.
Mm-hmm. And the people that it matters to, I mean, I've been there with the first day picture. Your kids, they don't care. They're not on social media to see their mom's picture and every other mom. They just, in your case, in that first day, they were nervous about going to new school.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was driving my kids home from school one day and I said something like, oh yeah, I'm going to DC tomorrow. And I remember one of my sons saying, again? And what do I think? Immediately, I was like, oh my God, they think I travel too much. I'm never home. This is awful. I'm a terrible mother. So of course, what do I ask? Do you think I travel too much? Am I never home? Am I a terrible mother? And they're like, no, you were just in DC last week. So we're just surprised you're going back. Right. But I had created this entire story in my head that I'm a terrible person. They don't know that everyone else's mother isn't home. Like in my head, I think everybody else is like home every single day, like making fresh baked chocolate chip cookies when their kids walk in the door. But the truth is we don't know what's happening in everybody else's houses, and neither do our kids. They think what's happening in our house is normal until I tell them it's not. Right. So like, I just stopped telling them it's not normal. And I just tell them this is normal. This is us. This is who we are.
That's great. That's an important message that we all should take in and hear.
Yeah.
And are there like 3 takeaways that you could tell us that we should know based on, this idea of what it is to be limitless and find this, the questions we should be asking, 3 questions we should ask ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say based on the thing that we just talked about, the best piece of advice I ever got was you're just not that important. Right. At the time I was growing my business, I was growing my family, I was growing my community. I thought I was that important to all things and all people. And I got advice that you're just not that important. And what this advice was there are areas in your life where you are that important and you got to double the hell down there. And everywhere else that you're not, forget about it. Right. So you got to figure out how to start saying no. And I write a lot about that in the book and in my blogs. So the first piece is like, are you really that important to all these things that matter? The second thing is who's in your family, right? The combination of friends and family that are actually the inputs that are helping you define what success actually means. Are you surrounding yourself with people that are actually additive to your life? People who actually know who you are today? When I dropped out of law school and joined the Clinton campaign, when I left the Clinton White House to go to that big firm, when I left the big firm to start my own company, when I sold my big company to just go off on my own and figure it out. My parents thought I was insane. But the last time I lived in the same house as my parents, I was 17. I was putting, empty milk cartons back in the refrigerator and leaving dirty socks in the living room floor. I didn't have a frontal lobe. So they don't know who I am. They don't know who I'm capable of. They love me, but they don't know me. So are those the people you're getting advice from? Right? Who are you getting advice from? Who are the inputs, right? Do you have those people in your life? Do you have the Carrie Lorenzes who are not letting you settle for mediocrity? And then the last thing I would say is, when we're talking about who gave you that scorecard, right? Is it your parents? Is it a boss? Like who's giving it to you? The last thing I would ask is, do you have the right scorecard or the wrong scorecard for right now, for who you are today? Because I think every 7 to 10 years, we change. Right? Maybe you get married, maybe you get divorced, maybe you have kids, maybe the kids go away, maybe you're, in one job, maybe you switch to a different job, maybe there's a global pandemic. I don't know. But every 7 to 10 years, the world changes so much that you have to actually think, Like, is this really what I want to do? Is this really still making me happy? Is this really the life that I want to live today? So those are the questions that I would ask myself.
Those
How
are
am I
great.
spending my time? Who are my inputs? And does this actually still really matter to me?
Those are great, really great questions. I think everyone will agree that those. I mean, I don't think we stop and ask ourselves those questions, and we don't really see that as our life is changing, that those questions could have new answers as we go.
Yeah, and if those questions don't have new answers, I think that's more problematic, I think, than if they do. We have this idea that failure is finale. Like, if I change, if I do something different, that clearly must be a failure. But I think that everything we do leads somewhere interesting, right? Like, think about the interesting career that you've had, Rose. It all led you to this moment today. Like, you wouldn't be able to do this if you hadn't done all the other things. And you survived all your bad days so far. You've survived all your mistakes so far. You've survived all those failures. None of those failures were finale. They were just fulcrum from which you learned and you grew and you innovated and you changed. So I said we have to start welcoming those things, and we have to, what is it, like a life unexamined is not a life worth living? I agree with that 100%. I don't think we need to navel gaze and, worry about it all day long, but I do think you have to have those check-in moments with yourself, with your partner, with your family, with your family, to figure out if you're really still doing what matters to you.
I think it's really important. I think that also the idea of not only your family, but the people who know you really well and have seen you in different parts of your life to reflect on where you are now.
Yes.
So important. So thank you so much for joining me. If you could wait, maybe I'll just say a few closing things. And first, what I didn't do also is I wanted to thank my sponsor, my new sponsor, Women in Technology International, and is known as WITI, WITI, and they're on all platforms. And they about a 30-year-old organization that has members in all parts of the world, and do webinars, and are working on a new study looking at glass ceiling. They had done one 25 years ago, and they're going to be updating it. So we will follow that. And it was really a pleasure having you. It's so brilliant, and really appreciate it. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Rose.
Thank you. Okay. Just tell you a little bit what's coming up. Tomorrow, I've been active on Twitter Spaces, which is another new thing I've been doing in the maybe since the summer. I've met people from all over the world and speak to them sometime. I'm part of a group. These are all the shows I've done. And tomorrow I will be doing a Woman to Follow Twitter Spaces conversation with Laura. So I hope you can all join me. It will be at 5:00. And you can listen even if you're not on Twitter. you can, I think you can't speak, but you can listen. But for anybody who's on Twitter, I'd love for you to join me, and we'll be talking to Laura and open the discussion more to other people to say what they're thinking. And I also would like to tell you about Sunday. It's a great show, the New York Times Read Along. And this week, they're going to have the executive director and founder of Humans Impact Institute, a nonprofit that uses art and culture to inspire environmental action for social good, with Tara DePort. And Sri will be hosting. So thank you, everybody. I will announce my next guest soon. We just got notified that one of my sons with COVID, they were waiting to see if we could go to his swim meet. So we are going to a regional meet in Atlanta, and I will be working out that schedule for my Woman to Follow show and seeing my son swim. Anyway, thank you everybody for listening, and I'd love to hear your comments afterwards. And I'll be putting out the 3 Women to Follow tomorrow from Laura. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.